Thank you for joining us for this Repertoire podcast. And now, your host, Scott Adams.
Hey, everybody, Scott Adams here. These are, as you know, my favorite podcasts. We're doing a podcast today with Lisa Wikstrom from Abbott, who is a Hall of Fame inductee for 2025. We'll be doing that dinner on April 17th in Fort Worth. We'd love to have you if you can attend, but this podcast is a lot of fun for me. I've known Lisa for a long time, and she has such a cool story of the acquisition she's been through. She's one of the few people who've been on distribution and the manufacturing side. So hope you enjoy it. And here we go with Miss Lisa Wikstrom. Hey, Lisa, thank you for being on the podcast with me today. And let me start by just saying congratulations on the 2025 class, the Hall of Fame. You are so deserving, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm thrilled to be with you today. Thanks.
And before we start, where are you in the country today? I always ask this question because we're all over the place.
And normally I would say a sunny San Diego, but I am in San Diego and it's raining outside. We've got a little bit of a cold front, and rain is welcome in Southern California, so that's a good.
No doubt, right? Yeah, it's actually pouring here. We have flood watches in Atlanta.
Oh wow!
Right now, and so it's cold and rainy, and hopefully that means spring is right around the corner. That's fingers crossed, because we've had a cold winter for us.
Yeah.
Well, hey, before we get started here, I'd like to just let you kind of give the audience kind of background. I mean, you've had a wonderful career, and talk about that and kind of where you started and some of the stops along the way.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you for this opportunity and the honor of this. I feel very, very fortunate to have found this industry. It was very serendipitous. I was living in Phoenix, coming over to San Diego at every free moment, like every Zony does, coming over to San Diego to beat the heat, very young in my career. And I moved over here in San Diego, and I happened upon this industry, the biotech industry, and started with the granddaddy of all biotech, which was hybrid. And really from there made my way through, different acquisitions, through different roles, through different companies along the way, always sort of grounded in point of care diagnostics, and really have felt very fortunate to have found this industry so many years ago.
It's funny. I always thought, and I don't know why, I think maybe because of some of your friends, but that you were with Titus at the beginning, but I think you just were friends with all of those people.
Yeah, it's FD Titus and Sons, right? Dwight's company at the time was Cindy Uhas. They were one of our major distributors, right? So I did a lot of work with Titus along the way. They were West Coast, we were West Coast, and a lot of good business together. But early on I was with Hybridtech and selling pregnancy testing, right? They had revolutionized pregnancy testing at that time, and we're really bringing that to market.
Before we get into some of the questions, around you and your career, and I obviously I'm going to ask you about the acquisitions, because you've been through a handful of them, that's for sure. Yeah. Tell me, kind of Hall of Fame and what it means to you. And I've asked this also from Brad and Jonathan. We did their podcast a couple weeks ago. If you could just share a couple of thoughts there, and maybe even some of the folks who've been in, Dwight's Titus is in, Cindy's in.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, honestly, Scott, when you shared the news with me that this was, something that was happening this year, I was so deeply touched and deeply honored, right? To have been recognized for something that I loved doing and have been really just driving as best I can for the business, for the companies, for the industry. It really is a very touching moment. And when I look about when I started in this industry and looking at who was getting the Hall of Fame, the Dwights, the John Sassons, the Cindys, all these people that really created an unbelievable more than an industry, more just a collaboration and a sense of community among our industry. I think that's very unique. And I look at those industry leaders, the John Morans of the world, from Allen and Ann Eiding from Midmark, all of those people have done an enormous amount for this industry, and to be part of that picture that goes on the wall, even whether there is truly a picture that goes on a wall. You know what I mean? It really is very, very touching, and I'm very humbled.
There is a picture that goes on the wall. It's your plaque, and you will get
Oh,
one,
great.
and we will have one. I just had somebody in the office that hadn't been in our office before, and they saw it and they're like, wow, I didn't realize there were that many people in the Medical
Yeah.
Distribution Hall of Fame. And he was going through it, and he's like, wow, this is, pretty cool. It is a really cool, we probably need to do a video and put it out for everybody to see kind of the wall and how it looks. It is
Yeah.
cool.
It's
You said something early on that I wanted to mention. I feel, and I know you do, blessed to have found this industry and have been in it for almost 30 years, and I love it. And we are
Yeah.
fortunate to be in the industry for sure. And I just want to make sure I mention that because I feel the same way. And the other thing I would say is it's my favorite call of the year when I get to call the folks and tell them who's going in. It's
I
touching. I've usually it's more of a funny thing, but I will say there's a couple where I've actually kind of teared up when I'm telling, and you were one of them. So sorry,
Well, thank
I
you.
just
Yeah,
teared up right there.
no,
Uh,
no, it was really a very special phone call to get, and a incredibly special honor. When you get recognized within your own company, right, it means one thing.
yeah.
But the heartfelt embrace by the industry is a whole different thing, right?
Yeah.
It is really it's been very, very meaningful.
Yeah, and it'll be a really fun night because of the roast and all of
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it'll be
There are
it'll
stories. There are stories.
there will be. Speaking of stories, tell me maybe a couple of pivotal moments in your career, some things that maybe changed the direction, or I mean, you've had like we said, we're going to talk about the acquisitions, but
Yeah.
some others.
Yeah, I think when I think back on my career, and this has been a great opportunity to sort of step back and look back and really reflect, there are times where even when you are in the best of times at a certain junctures in companies,
Yeah.
you don't even realize just how good it is until you're outside and into another sort of a challenge and adventure, right? So when I think about at BioSite, right, we launched BNP, right, 2 years before anybody in market, and really had to educate the whole world, cardiologists, ED physicians, laboratorians, about this new and novel marker. And I traveled the world really with a thought leading cardiologist to do that. And that worldwide experience, that understanding that, we knew information about something in healthcare that they yet didn't have any visibility to, and we were educating them and creating a new standard of care, was really, I think, incredible. And it really informed how I've always approached since that point forward of selling diagnostics. It's clinical first. Unless you have a clinical reason for your test, it's not very meaningful. And that has been, I think, a very strong guiding light.
I can't remember the exact stat. You may know it. I want to say I learned it from Fisher at some point, but they made this comment that in the health system, diagnostics or testing, lab testing only makes up like, I don't know, I'm going to make this number up, 12% of the spend, but it dictates 80% of the treatment.
Yeah.
And just how
yeah.
important the diagnostic world is.
Yeah, and that stat varies, right? The stat that we typically refer to is 70%. It informs 70% of the decisions of clinicians.
That's close.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. I think at the year, at whatever,
Right.
however you look at it, but it is whether it's 70 or 80, it really is a profound difference, right? And being able to look at that and say, in healthcare, really, what is the best path for this patient in front of me?
Who maybe 1, 2, 3, I don't, whatever number you come up with, have been like mentors or have made an impact through all of this that's kind of helped you throughout your career? And if you want, you can share a story about them.
Yeah. So thank you for that. I've been very fortunate to have had, I think, some really great mentors along the way. And when I think about it, they all have, I think, one really good, strong characteristic through it. They've always been sort of fact-based, realistic, and non-ego, right?
Yeah.
So, that
Great characteristics.
Yes, great characteristics, and very humanistic. So, when I think about this industry and how I started at Hybritech, one of my first mentors in this industry, and this is a name you will recognize, was Bob Books, right?
Oh yeah, Bob.
Bob, Bob, it
Booksy.
was Booksy. Bob was instrumental in bringing on this young professional that came from the ad agency world. I'd been working with Paramount Pictures and General Mills on the consumer side, moved to San Diego, answered an ad in the newspaper for a marketing analyst. And he hired me on for this new POL division that he was building. I remember sitting in his office and literally on a flipboard, he'd be like, now this is distribution. This is what, GP dollars are. This is what GP margin is. This is what, really makes all of this work. And through all this, I've been reflecting. And I remember early on, one of the first meetings with John Sasson, they were just starting PSS. I think they had like 13 branches at the time. And Bob said, we're going to have dinner tonight. It's a business dinner with, John Sasson. He comes from BD. They're setting up this new nationwide distributor. And that's when no one was nationwide yet, right? This nationwide distributor. And, we need to really go out and see what he has to say, because we may need to bring them on. Right. So I'll never forget that conversation.
Good thing you
did. Good thing you did. And it was just really to see how relationships in this business worked, and how John was sort of leveraging his relationships to begin and build on PSS, and how Bob was understanding what was sort of transpiring in the industry. That was great. And as somebody outside of my own companies and as a direct mentor, I always did look at John Sasson, right? Because he really always went dealing from a manufacturer perspective. He was always fair, forthright, understand what was going to drive the business, all of that. And I always really admired that. I think
it's sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
No,
I was going to mention John there. I can't tell you how many times on podcasts that I do. I probably do, I don't know, 25 of these a year. How many times John's mentioned in them? I mean, what an amazing human. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, he is an amazing human. And thank you, because he was really made a lot of difference to this industry, made a ton of difference to this industry. And when I think about a mentor as well, Cindy Uhas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she's one of the Hall of Famers as well. Cindy, hired me into what was then, I was out of City of Industry, the old Titus building, but we were General Medical that then became McKesson. And, Cindy taught me very early on a level of fearlessness, right?
Yeah.
It's one of her biggest traits. Yeah.
100%.
Everybody that knows Cindy knows that's a strong trait. But she also said, Lisa, through all of this, because we were going through some challenging times, you will never go wrong by knowing your customers and being connected to your sales team, right? And knowing those two things are sort of our guiding light, with the guiding light back then. And I've held that near and dear to my heart, and it couldn't be any truer, right? Staying relevant to what matters to your customers and relevant to the channel and what makes a difference to your sales team, to the distributor partners, is really, I think, fundamental.
Lisa, how many acquisitions have you been through from the start to now?
Yeah. So I'm going to break this up into two, right?
Yeah.
So acquisitions where my company was actually acquired, right? 4, right? So starting with the Hybritech days, and Eli Lilly spun us off to where we were actually part of the Inverness acquiring companies, right?
Yeah.
And all of that, during that phase, over 66 companies were acquired. I personally was involved in 6 companies that we acquired and then folded into our own sort of physician diagnostics group focused organization. So that was BioSite, Cholestech, Hemosense, Access Shield.
All my 12-time advertisers.
All your 12-time advertisers that went down to 1. Yeah, sorry, Scott. I think that will forever be our our
connection.
legacy within
Yeah.
Repertoire. Yeah. But that was, that happened very, very quickly. And it was very, a great learning experience of coming into organizations, assessing really where their business stood, where we were going, and how to sort of bring all of that together from a Salesforce perspective, from a marketing perspective, all of that. And I will say, I think one of the biggest compliments that as a management team we ever got was from John Sasson. We had gone to a meeting, and we were together now, and it was probably 6 months post acquisition of all these companies coming together under Inverness. And John said, a lot of people could have gotten this wrong, but this team got it right.
That's awesome.
And that was like the highest compliment, I think, as a leadership team that we could have gotten. So it was great.
You know how the industry goes through, like, it seems like every 5 years we got to deal with something, whether it's .com, whether it's Obamacare and the 2.3% device tax, or I think the Inverness acquisitions was one of those times for a lot of distribution reps, because they were scared to death of, like, they're buying all these people and they're going to start selling direct on us. And, that was such the scuttlebutt at HIDA, and, where at whatever meeting you were at, everybody was so nervous about it, and you guys did handle it right. And once you got your arms around it, it was,
we got our arms around it. And I will give full credit to the Inverness crew that came in with the leadership under Ron Zwanziger, right? And Peter Shoy was part of that organization.
Peter, that's who that's the name I was trying to think of.
Yeah. And, Peter is an incredible leader. But what they did really right is they went out and they talked to all of our distribution partners and the management team before they did these acquisitions. So they knew the strength of the business in the marketplace and where they sort of needed to lean in and to lean out. There was never a decision or a contemplation of, do we not use distribution?
Yeah.
Right. For me to hear that is of course people speculate, because in a vacuum, everybody sort of thinks worst case scenario, but it really was a very rewarding time for us to say, okay, how do we pull all of this together? And the sum of all these parts has to be greater. And I think we did that. And I think it was really great. And that's the legacy we are today.
It might have been where I was at the time, where I was hearing so much of that. I was running ABCO, and InfoLab was part of ABCO at the time. And they were like, they're going to take this stuff direct, and we're not going to have access to, so it might've been that. And then the next year I came into Repertoire after you guys had gotten everybody. So that was 17 years ago, because I've been here 17 years when that was going on. Yeah. What's kind of the legacy you'd like to leave, Lisa? You mentioned those mentors, and those characteristics of them, I think, are wonderful. And when I think of those characteristics, I think of you. You've always been no nonsense with me, and just direct, even if it's something that, hey, I know Scott's not going to want to hear this, but it's part of the business.
It is. And as I tell people, it's like, I really don't know how to be any other way. Right. But it is, if I think about my legacy, I want people to think about of the legacy as one of integrity. Right. I think if, you really do your best to try and do what's best in the right situations. Right. Yeah. And be very forthright as best you can. You can never always say everything, right? But there's always a level of being forthright, being a partner, and making a difference, right? And keeping that customer really front and center. Yeah, I think is profound. To me, knowing that, when we did all these launches way back when, and made a difference in healthcare for people with heart failure and all of that, a lot of folks, when they were selling diagnostics, weren't really necessarily linking it to the clinical story, right? It's like, oh, I just have this, and this is what it does.
CPT code.
Yeah. Here's a CPT code. This is, pregnancy test. It's a strep test or whatever. Yeah. And not that those tests aren't important, because they're critically important, but knowing that every test has a human on the other side of it, and how critical that result is, has kept me very grounded. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. It's one of the things we talk about constantly with manufacturers, is you got to talk about what's in it for the distribution rep, what's in it for the clinician, but more importantly, what's in it for the patient. And if you take those three things and you give that to the distribution rep, you're probably going to gain some market share, but it's got to start with the patient and work its way backwards. For sure. What are some fundamental changes you've seen over the last, or you can start from kind of over your career, kind of from what, just selling diagnostics early on to selling them today, and some of those fundamental changes you've seen?
Yeah. But, there is so much more acceptance and understanding of point of care diagnostics, right?
Yeah.
So when we were out there, talking about needing the answers now and knowing the answers now, it was always sort of a level of resistance, whether you're talking to an ED doc or wherever it was just sort of a little bit of push. I will say that, I think to sort of fully break through that wall of what is the value of a rapid result is what the COVID pandemic gave us.
Yeah.
Right? I think everybody would have and did embrace wanting to know whether they had COVID or not within 15 minutes, right? That was invaluable. I tell my colleagues, they're like, what is, the pandemic and all of this meant? And I said, well, it's the first time in my career that I think my family really understands what I do. I'm not in pharmaceuticals.
Right.
No, that isn't my drug being advertised on television. Yeah. I'm in diagnostics. And they're like, oh, now they understand. And they even, likely understand the difference between molecular and antigen, right? I think the whole world kind of got
and what supply chain is.
Yeah, exactly. I think the whole world got a crash course on diagnostics and the importance of what it brings to the industry. But I will say the one thing that hasn't changed is still the need to remind people how important quick result is, right? A lot of us had, fatigue after the pandemic, and the thing that you wanted most was just let's go back to the way things were. A lot of really good forward momentum happened in point of care diagnostic testing during the pandemic, and making sure that access remains is really critical.
That's my last question for you, and I'm going to tee it up with, based off what you just said there. Coming out of the pandemic, I had a conversation with Abney around distribution reps selling diagnostic. And he goes, it's unbelievable how much prior to the pandemic, there were maybe 20% would talk diagnostics or go into the lab. Post-pandemic, that number's jumped significantly. And I tell that quick story to bring us to, Lisa, how important has distribution been to your career and the distribution reps to your organizations?
Yeah. Well, distribution has been incredibly important to my career, right? So when I started at Hybrid and we're going through an acquisition, I did sort of that, peek your head up and like, what's, lay of the land. And I made a very purposeful decision to go into distribution, to get that as part of my arsenal of understanding, to really what it meant to really distribute these products. So, many folks may not know, I was the marketing director at McKesson for a number of years. And the contacts, the context, the understanding of distribution and what they bring just got even further embedded into my support of the distribution model, right? So when you think about the relationships that the distributor reps have every day and they go into these accounts, the access, the knowledge of what their customers are needing, and really the resource that they become for their customers is invaluable.
Yeah, I'm the biggest cheerleader of them for sure.
Yeah.
And I know that you were at McKesson, but I do forget it, that, I always think of you diagnostic the whole time.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate you, and just what a wonderful person you are, and what a wonderful business person you are. Thank you so much for doing the podcast with me, and thank you for being my friend.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the podcast there with Lisa. I love her. She's an amazing businesswoman, but really an amazing human. And I'm very thankful for the relationship that I've had with her over the years. Hopefully, if you have the availability, we'd love to have you at the Hall of Fame. It is on April 17th in Fort Worth, Texas. And it'll be a great night. It's a roast. We give the net proceeds of the evening away to charity every year. So it's a lot of fun. But regardless, hope you enjoyed the podcast and have a wonderful day.